Hello, everyone, and welcome to Pod TV's Economics with David M. Walker, who is the former U.S. Comptroller General of the United States and the author of America 2024, Still a Superpower. And what David is trying to educate us on is what our fiduciary duties need to be moving forward with the United States so that we can continue being the best country in the world. And right now, we're struggling with the deficit and how we're spending our money, what we're spending the money on. And David is really good at looking at these issues and determining what we need to do. He also goes to Washington, D.C., and he talks to Congress and he provides them the solutions that he thinks will make a big difference, not just for the government, but for all the people. So, everyone, thank you for joining us today. I think David is in the house. Welcome, David.
Hi, Cam. How are you?
I'm doing great. I'm just so excited about the turn of events. I feel a lot of energy. A lot of people are asking really good questions now. But what we're not focused on, to me, is what is the most important, and that is we still have a huge deficit. And what are we spending the money on? And what could the administration coming in to or the next administration coming in, whoever it is, what should be their priorities? What should we stop spending? We've talked about this continuously, but there's a lot going on right now, and we're just not focused on what we need to be focused on. And I'm looking forward to hearing our conversation today about the deficit and what we really need to be focused on spending and cutting.
Well, sure. Let's start at the top. In fiscal 2024, which ends on September 30, 2024, we're estimated to have between a 1.8 and 1.9 trillion dollar deficit. And based upon the Congressional Budget Office latest projections, they expect to have an average of $2 trillion plus deficits every year for the next 10 years. And that assumes that we don't have any wars, we don't have any major natural disasters, we don't have any pandemics, we don't have any new government programs, we don't have any significant tax cuts. And by the way, we already know that the major presidential candidates do not have a credible plan to put our finances in order. At the same point in time, one candidate is talking about growing government more and promising more, government spending programs. The other candidate is talking about the possibility of cutting taxes more. The numbers just don't add up. And so we need our presidential candidates to really focus on two things. What are they going to do to put our federal finances in order? And those may be more process-oriented steps rather than specific reforms, although we can talk about that. Process steps like supporting a fiscal sustainability commission, statutory, like the Fiscal Commission Act that's already passed out of the House Budget Committee on a bipartisan basis. And then secondly, supporting the need for a constitutional fiscal responsibility amendment that will limit how much debt as a percentage of the economy that we can take on, that will force current and future Congresses to make tough choices rather than continue to kick the can down the road. But ultimately, if you don't have presidential leadership, you're not going to get the other two things, and we need all three in order to solve the problem. The second thing that they need to be focused on is how are we going to save Social Security? Social Security is a critically important program. Tens of millions of Americans rely on it as their primary or sole source of retirement income. If you do nothing on Social Security in 2033, you get a 21% across the board cut because that's when the trust fund goes to zero. I don't know any candidate who would support a 21% across the board cut in benefits, but yet I also don't know any candidate who's got a credible plan to avoid that. And that needs to be a key part of this debate as well. and I'm not hearing anything from either of the major presidential candidates on that. So I'm hoping things will change in the near future and before the next presidential debate, which is tentatively scheduled for September 10th. But we will see. We will see.
Okay.
You still there, Kim?
Yes. Internet issues. I hope one of the things that they are spending money on is improved internet out here where I live. That's one thing I think we need to focus a little bit on is supplying the technology rural areas need. I don't think that they did what they promised, even though they set aside the money, at least here in North Carolina. But, it's like you said, do we cut money from people who were expecting, something for their future? Or do we cut spending somewhere else? I mean, there's just too much. And, why would you increase government like what you were talking about and cut taxes? I mean, and again, you got two parties saying two different things. And I think what we need to do is get them focused on the priority. I don't think anyone's ever budget a checkbook that's in office. That's disturbing. I remember watching a debate one time during the primaries when they asked this question, and Peter Butter, I can't ever pronounce his last name. I wish I could. But he was the only one who actually sat there and crunched numbers and did a math with his answers. Nobody else did that. And I thought that was so impressive. I wasn't looking at all of their fluff and stuff answers. The fact that he sat there and crunched numbers with his answer was beautiful, but nobody's doing that. Nobody's saying, well, these are the numbers you do, but these are the numbers we have, and this is where we need to go. And they need to take that spreadsheet and go through it with a fine-tooth comb like we do at home. And I think that's the biggest problem is nobody knows how to do a budget. So we have with us.
Let's talk about a few numbers. Let's talk about a few numbers based on what you just raised, Kim. Okay.
Okay.
First, as I said before, we're spending about 1.8 to 1.9 trillion more than we're taking in. And so the last thing you need to do is to have more government spending programs. When you're already in a 1.8 to 1.9 trillion dollar annual hole, the last thing you want to do is grow government more. Secondly, not all tax cuts stimulate the economy. Very few tax cuts pay for themselves. Let me clarify what I mean by that. I mean, you generate more revenues as a percentage of the economy afterwards than before. Many tax cuts can generate more nominal dollar revenues than before the cut, but not necessarily more as a percentage of the economy. If you look at our spending now, we're spending well in excess of the post-World War II average as a percentage of the economy and headed up. If you look at revenues, we're taxing it below average post-World War II averages and scheduled to go up a little bit, but the gap between spending and revenues is projected to widen. The fastest growing expense is interest, for which you get nothing. We're now seeing a number of our major purchases of debt of debt securities reduce their appetite for U.S. debt, China and Japan in particular, which means that's going to put more upward pressure on interest rates for U.S. debt over time. If you look at the composition of the budget, 73% of the budget is for mandatory spending, where we've written a blank check. And if you look at the tax expenditures, deductions, exemptions, credits, and exclusions, 1.7 to 1.9 trillion, 1.8 trillion a year, the Congress only controls about 15% of annual spending. 15% out of 100%. How can you call that a budget? And then if you talk about the budget and the appropriations bills, in my lifetime, and I was born in 1951, unfortunately, I'm in very good health, but knock on wood here, and thank God for that. But since 1951, the Congress has only passed timely budget and appropriation bills 4 times since 1951, and the last time they did it was 1996. So the system is broken. We're out. Congress is out of touch. It's out of control. We've lost control of our finances. But again, I come back. You've got to have presidential leadership. The Congress is a committee. You can't run a country by committee. Only the president is elected by all the people in the United States, or all the people who decide to vote. Only the president has the bully pulpit. We're gonna need to make reforms across the board. Everything's going to need to be on the table, but not everything is equal. Social Security is critically important. Okay. And we need to protect it, preserve it, and, for current and future generations. But we're going to have to make bigger changes in other areas, including, especially healthcare, including defense, and definitely including on tax preferences, to dramatically reduce the number of tax preferences that we have, to be able to make the system simpler, fairer, more competitive, to be able to be enforced, and to ultimately generate more revenues as a percentage of GDP. Those are just a few thoughts off the top, and I'm happy to drill down on any issue.
I'm curious, though, how do we prioritize what actually will get cut? Because you've got everybody who's there saying, well, this is so important, this is more important. How do we prioritize that?
Well, first, let's talk about what the United States does not have that it needs, and that I'm working on. And I'm going to be meeting with the Comptroller General of the United States, Gene Dodaro, my successor, who was my number 2 when I was Comptroller General, very capable person who's only got a year and a half left in his job. And I'm going to make an argument that we should add a new item to the high risk list, because the federal government is not well positioned for the much needed and long overdue strategic transformation. And let me clarify what I mean by that. The U.S. government does not have a set of key national indicators: economic, diplomatic, national security, et cetera, indicators that say, how are we going to measure success? Right. What are we trying to accomplish? How do we measure success? We need that. It needs to be incorporated into a consolidated, integrated strategic plan. Individual departments and agencies have them, but we don't have a consolidated and integrated plan. That plan has to also be resource constrained. In the absence of those two things, all government can do is throw money at problems. But they don't know whether they're making a difference or not. For example, you talk about broadband. They've made a big promise with regard to broadband and internet connection. They spent a bunch of money, but they've not made much progress. Another example is electric charging stations. They've allocated $7.5 billion to build 500,000 charging stations. They built 8 in 2 years. Okay. The government it has to be fundamentally transformed to where it is future focused, results oriented, generating value for money. That's got to be done in addition to the kinds of reforms that are necessary to be able to reform our spending programs, our tax policies, et cetera. But just the basic business of operating government that generates positive results from the American people has got to be made a much higher priority than it has been in the past, because government's grown too big, promised too much, subsidized too many, lost control of the budget, and is not managed for outcome-based results.
I agree. And, it's unnerving to me, like when I hear things like no taxes on tips, or no taxes on this, or we're not going to tax the wealthy. And then you hear someone else say, we're going to tax big corporate. I mean, there's no control. Nobody seems, you would think that all of this somewhere would be common sense. And instead of telling the people what they want to hear, we sit down and somebody just does what needs to be done, just like you do at home, right? You don't sit there and you go and do everything what you want to hear, right?
Well,
So
let me give you an example. Okay. There's a new 4-letter word in fiscal policy. It's called math. But in addition to that, okay, in addition to that, the Peter G. Peterson Foundation, which I served as its first chief executive officer, recently funded 7 organizations to come up with fiscal plans to try to put our finances in order. 7 different organizations. Some of them are on the right, some of them are on the left, some of them are kind of in the middle. And they all have different opinions about how to do it, how much of it ought to be additional revenues, how much of it ought to be spending reductions, how much of it ought to be looking at the social insurance contracts that we have out there. But here's what they miss. How do you get it done? There's plenty of ideas about what needs to be done, but how you get it done. And I come back to the 3 things that I started with: presidential leadership, a fiscal commission, statutory, and a constitutional amendment. That's how you get it done.
So, and I want you to explain the fiscal commission here, because some people are not going to understand that. But, we've got someone mentioning here, a viewer, that we've been hearing about this deficit for years, but we still seem to be okay. Is the ship just sinking slow? Or, I mean, is there something to be said about why we appear to be okay?
Well, first, others have said, how do you go bankrupt? First, slowly, and then suddenly. Well, the United States is not going to go bankrupt, okay, because as long as we have the ability to borrow. But once people lose confidence in our ability to put our finances in order, then we're going to have a tough time selling all of our bonds at reasonable interest rates. And that's already starting to happen. The other thing you have to do is you have to help people understand the connection between what happens if you don't put your finances in order. And let me give you an example. For 2021 and 2022, the Congress and the president followed the so-called modern monetary theory, which is a flawed and failed theory that said deficits and debt don't matter as long as you can borrow your own reserve currency unless and until you have excess inflation. All right. Well, what happened was they followed that. Spending went out of control. Interest rates went up. Inflation went up. Okay. And that was put in check in 2023 when one of the houses of Congress flipped, and therefore you couldn't continue to be able to get the votes necessary to continue that path. The truth is that people have already felt some of the pain associated with out of control fiscal policy and inadequate monetary policy with the Federal Reserve, because we had excess inflation. All right. We have much higher interest rates. All right. Things are going to get a lot worse in the future if we don't deal with the root cause. The truth is, we have fiscal cancer. You can cure cancer, but first you have to recognize you have it and you need to take aggressive steps. My wife beat cancer, but first it has to be diagnosed and then you have to take aggressive steps. We're not doing anything. And people are thinking about more spending increases or more tax cuts. That dog don't hunt, as they say in Texas.
It don't. And it's a very scary situation to see that there's absolutely no control, that there's just an inflammation of going in other directions and spinning the topics and spinning the stories and misrepresenting the facts. And it would be nice just to have a spreadsheet posted somewhere of this is where we are. These are the numbers, the real numbers, not NBC or CBS or any of those, but just from the government. I would love to see a spreadsheet with a target. And like you said, let's talk about the key point indicators. Let's talk about what, and let's post them. These are our key point indicators, and this is what we're going to be goals. These are our goals, but nobody does that. And I think that's a good start. Whenever Nick and I want to do something, we start writing it down. We start making a picture of it, and and then we build from it. But I don't see anywhere where anyone has this spreadsheet that we can trust that shows all of this. And I think that would be a good start. But we've got a panel here eager to see you this morning. We have Rick Rosner from California. Good morning, Rick.
Hey.
And I think Rick has had a question for you. Well, no, and then we have Shaq from Australia. We have Sasha just jumped off, so we'll bring him back. We have Dan Worthington.
I have two things. Biden has become a lame duck president. To some extent, he can do whatever he wants because he's not trying to get reelected. Now, the Dems are trying, but Biden could announce the formation of the Department of Deficit Reduction, or he could announce a commission to save Social Security and Medicare. And I think people would welcome that. Thing two, at the end of 1989, when the Soviet Union dissolved and the Berlin Wall came down, we got a peace dividend in the military budget because we didn't have to fight as much of a Cold War as we'd been fighting for 40 years. And we should have a tech dividend now. AI and other tech should be applied to all departments of the government. They say that in the normal working person's day, AI could do 52% of what a normal worker does in their day. Whenever I talk to a doctor, I ask, what is AI doing for you? And there's, I get different answers, but one doctor says, answers my emails. So like if you could apply AI to the entire government and figure out where you could do all sorts of bureaucratic reduction, I bet you you just look at the average American spends 13 hours preparing their tax documents. And I bet you the IRS spends a huge number of person hours. If you simplified taxes, you would save Americans tens of millions of hours, and you'd save the IRS, tens of thousands of hours just by applying technology.
So I'll come in on a couple of things if I can. Firstly, every time I speak, Kipley's left. Kipley, I was going to give you a compliment your pink shirt. I was the first one here today on the other shows. I reckon I've set the trend up, David. Look, I do want to make a couple of points.
Internet. So.
I think it's great what you're trying to do. This is just one part where I'm not sure 100% agree with what you're saying. I think the Social Security should just be scrapped. I've got no skin in the game. I'm not American, so it's not going to affect me. But you've got young people today that are being told that they're going to be forced to pay into a system, the benefits of which they're not going to be able to enjoy in the same way as the older generation. So keep Social Security funded so it meets its current obligations, but give young people something else to have as a retirement plan. And oftentimes that means that you privatize parts of this. One of our viewers put in a few comments there about young people not believing that it's a government expenditure problem. It's government revenue, not government expenditure. And the other thing that he said is that people know what to do, tax the rich. Well, on both of those points, he's right. But when I say that we need to change the tax code around the Western world, I'm not saying that we should change it to make it more simple just for simplicity's sake, although that's a benefit. And I'm not saying that we should change it because we want to let rich people get off with not paying as much tax. We need to change it because just simply having higher marginal rates of tax on income doesn't work. But there isn't any real conversation about how to actually get that done. And young people, I think, are right to feel a little bit aggrieved and say, look, I can't afford to buy a house. I can't afford to get married. I can't afford to have children. I can't afford to go through college and university. My grandparents sit there and say, oh, I got a job working for $2 an hour, at a cafe. Yeah, well, you can't do that anymore and put yourself through college. It doesn't work like that. So I think young people are really getting the short end of the stick. And lastly, if I can just say to Rick, that was a really nice try. We love you, our Democrat from California, but there is no way that we're getting Californian whiz kids, tech guys, to be in charge of all government agencies because they're the only ones that know AI. But it was a good try.
Run an analysis. Like the piece I just read.
All right, Rick, I'm just teasing you. It's okay.
All right, the peace dividend, starting in 1989, resulted in a reduction of military spending as a percentage of GDP. Now, I don't believe these numbers. It's Wikipedia, from 6% down to 3%. That can't be. I don't know where it's going wrong, but there was a definite savings in the tens to hundreds of billions of dollars. I think
Alaska forced the issue in relation to its oil exploration, other mineral exploration, and made sure that the people of Alaska got to share in some of the profits being generated out of that. I believe Australia should do that. Now, although the United States does have oil, but the United States economy is not as based on mineral exploration like Canada and Australia is. But there are certainly ways that more revenue can be shared with the people of America from profits that are generated from the United States itself. But what's happening now, you're never going to have that conversation. And Dave, you know as well as I do, there's no chance that this conversation about saving Social Security will happen in this election cycle. Will it happen in 2028? Maybe, but you and I both know it'll probably happen a couple of weeks before the thing goes bankrupt. Maybe 2032, there'll be some logical, rational conversation, which is sad.
Let me jump in on several issues that have been raised, okay? First, on defense, you're right. We did have a post-Cold War peace dividend. A good friend of mine who I'm on the Federal Fiscal Sustainability Board with, Admiral Bill Owens, was vice chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and he was responsible for that downsizing. I'm on the Defense Business Board, and I can tell you there's plenty of opportunity to reduce defense spending without compromising national security. And that's because the bureaucracy is out of control, and you're probably going to need a bureaucracy crack. There also leverages technology, among many other things, in order to be able to get that done. And that needs to be done sooner rather than later, not just in the Defense Department, but frankly, across government. Secondly, with regard to taxation, what the American people prefer is to streamline and simplify the tax code, to be able to dramatically reduce the deductions, exemptions, credits, and exclusions, to keep the tax rate as low as possible, but then to eliminate the difference between capital gains tax and ordinary income tax, because wealthy people don't make their money through wages. They make their money through investments, okay? In addition to that, you don't pay social insurance taxes on investment income. And so therefore, you're still providing a tax advantage to capital gains because you're not having to pay social insurance taxes on that, if you will. With regard to Social Security, my frustration on Social Security is that we have an opportunity to exceed the expectation of every generation of Americans, because young people don't think they're going to get it. Seniors think they're going to get taken advantage of. We can reform it to make it solvent, sustainable, secure, increase our savings rates, increase the return without and exceed the expectation of all generations of Americans. I call that a win. And the other thing you have to do on Social Security, Shaq, I think, in order to get people to act sooner rather than later, right now, the major candidates are saying, I'm not going to touch Social Security. Okay, then here's what I would do on that. And I may do that as a co-moderator for one of the debates coming up. And that is, all right, so you're not for touching Social Security. So that means you're for a 21% cut across the board in benefits for Social Security in 9 years. Because if you don't touch Social Security, that's what you get. So is that what you're for? And then I think all of a sudden you're going to get them saying, well, no, I'm not really for that. All right, well, then what are you going to do in order to make sure that doesn't happen? And Shaq, you raise a good point. It's not just a matter of what do you do, but when do you do it? And historically, the last time we reformed it was 83. You know why we did it in 83? It was within months of the trust fund going to zero. And so hopefully we can learn that the power of compounding can work for us if we make it sooner rather than later.
If I may, though, and I was born in 1983, so I'm glad I had some effect on America. Look, if I can, your generation had the benefit of Milton Friedman, who spoke to Ronald Reagan at length, testified in front of Congress at length. And he warned about this very issue, and nothing happened. Now, I totally understand that for older people today and for people that are likely to be drawing on Social Security in the next 10 or 15 years, hey, a 21% cut sounds pretty bad. But some of the proposals are that young people pay into the system at higher rates for a longer period of time. Like, they're getting a much more significant than 21% cut. Can I just put this proposition? If you have a look at the return that a person receives in Social Security benefits versus what's paid into them, the return is abysmal. If all the Social Security system did was go and buy 30-year notes, they would, and compound that over the period of time, they would have had a much better return. Let's say that was the only change that you made, but you increased taxes on Social Security drawdowns. Young people in 50 years' time from now would be better off than what they are right now, based on the proposals to reform it. So I totally agree with you that this is a problem the United States needs to resolve. But I think that the United States would be better to actually have a look at how other countries are doing it, because we all have a similar issue with an aging population and how to fund these things. But I feel like even here in Australia, the conversation was, okay, we're going to raise the pension age. Well, hang on a minute. Why should young people now who've had a harder, slower start to life also now have to have a longer working life and less benefits when they're older in order to make up for mistakes that were made by generations that were warned repeatedly by almost every major economist at the time, telling them these programs are not sustainable?
Yeah, well, two things, and then let's rotate topics. But one, when I was a trustee of Social Security and Medicare from 1990 to 1995, myself and my co-public trustee, who used to be Commissioner of Social Security under Carter, may God rest his soul, Stan Ross, he's passed, we blew the whistle that the 1983 Commission did not solve the Social Security problem because they didn't consider known demographic trends. And hopefully we can do things sooner rather than later. And I'm a big advocate for looking at what others have done. And I was on a phone call this morning talking about the Australian superannuation system. It's something that, we need to take a look at. It needs to be part of the discussion, if you will. But we got a lot of things we got to do. Social Security is one of them, but it's only a piece of the much bigger puzzle that we got to come to grips with. And I come back to where I started. One candidate wants to grow government more. The other one wants to cut it, but hadn't figured out how he's going to cut it, and wants to reduce taxes more. So,
hey David, this is Steve Rao. I've got to run to another interview. It's just a media frenzy, but it's always comes to see this great analyst, David Walker. Real quickly before I leave, and I just want to get your take, and we might be reaching out to you to get you on North Carolina radio and TV soon, but what is your take of Vice President Harris' candidacy? Just real quickly, I just want to hear from you what your thoughts are.
Well, I think she's in the honeymoon period. Okay. People were relieved that Biden dropped out because they were very concerned about his mental acuity, energy, and stamina. I think there was a lot of pent-up contributions that would have been made, but they withheld those as a basis to try to get him to drop out. So now he's dropped out. She's obviously younger than Trump. She obviously is, energetic. She obviously represents a historical opportunity to elect the first woman, and also happens to be of color with some Asian descent as well. So there's a lot of things in there. I think really what it comes down to this: if the campaign ultimately is based upon policies, a policy debate, I think there's a stark contrast between Trump and Harris on policies. And I think Trump would likely prevail if that's what it comes down to. On the other hand, if it's not primarily based on policies, if it's based on personalities and other things, you could get a very different result. And the final analysis is it all comes down to about 7 states.
Yeah.
National polls don't matter. Your state's one of them. I think the vice presidential pick for Vice President Harris is particularly important. I think she ought to make it based on electoral votes, because that's the only thing that really matters. Popular vote doesn't matter. And she's going to have a tough choice there. I mean, I know your governor's Pennsylvania's one, and then Mark Kelly from Arizona, who's not a governor. Right. He's a senator, another one.
My last question is, don't you think, and then my last question, guys, and I've got to run, but I'll be on longer next week. My last question is, do you believe that that the vice president pick is even more important because I think now it's kind of ironic that I personally believe that Senator Vance does not have enough experience to be president either. And so I think there's a lot of people that could be scared. Let's say something were to happen to Trump, would he be ready? But if she picks a vice president with more experience, like a Governor Cooper or Shapiro, don't you think that could make a difference at the end?
I don't think the age is going to be as big of an issue because Trump clearly has the energy and the stamina. I think there's no question about that. Okay. I expect it'll be an issue, but I don't think it'll be a dispositive issue. I think qualifications matter. All right. I personally always like governors better than legislators, although I know Mark Kelly and I like Mark Kelly, and I've had dinner with he and Gabby's home before when I was doing the 10 million a minute tour. They're both great people. But in the case of, in the case of J.D. Vance, he's not the youngest person that's been vice president before. There have been others that have been young as vice president, and that grew into it.
Yeah,
I just realized I just did some math. This is the first time.
Thank you, David Walker. I got to run.
Well, one thing, he's not who I would have picked.
Yeah.
But I don't think I think the decision is going to primarily be based upon top of the ticket, with the exception if she picks a governor or somebody in a swing state, the VP could end up making a difference in that swing state, but I don't think it's likely to make a big difference beyond that swing state.
When you become the president and you've got Steve Rao as your vice, remember, I will then become American, so I can become the second state. That was the promise that was made, right?
One day.
This is the first time in history where a ticket has had one candidate being twice as old as the other candidate. Trump 78, Vance 39, which is
I hope you weren't talking about Harris because your math would have been off, but I got you. Good point.
So,
everyone's talking about the
Harris,
VP
pick about pent up donations. People were waiting to see what happened before they donated, and then they flooded their donations.
Right, that's exactly what happened, right?
But I think there's also pent up desire to have a candidate that doesn't gross people out. The last time we had like a slick, charismatic candidate was Obama in 2012, and then Hillary versus Trump, they had high negatives. Biden versus Trump in 2020, high negatives for each. This time around, it was Biden creeps people out, looks like the Crypt Keeper. Trump creeps other people out, and then RFK creeps me out. This testosterone abusing, bloated head, weird scratchy voice dude. It's nice to have a candidate who.
Hang on, hold up. RFK's got a vocal problem, right? That he was born with. That's why.
Okay, but that doesn't mean that it doesn't. I actually don't know, but
I'm sorry, but the Democrats have just spent all this time talking about ageism and picking on people's disabilities, despite the fact that Governor Abbott's in a wheelchair.
I didn't know it was I don't know. Okay, I'm sorry, but everything else about him creeps me out. The testosterone with his big old, he's 70 years old, but he's got the pectoral muscles of a 35-year-old, and he's got a big old red.
What would you rather? He'd be like out of weight and old and feeble. Come on now. I just want to come back to VP.
Dan, hold up. Dan has had his hand up. So Dan.
There's, if you compare Vance against Harris, and look at their education, for example. Harris went to Hastings. At the time it was not in the top 50 of law schools. She failed the bar exam in California the first time around. Vance graduated in the top of his class at Yale. His wife is a clerk for the Supreme Court justice. So the guy is not dumb. He is educationally accomplished. Harris is not educationally accomplished. So let's look at that. Being a prosecutor in the city of San Francisco or the state of California doesn't qualify you for the presidency because it doesn't teach you anything about governance. She's been the vice president, but she hasn't been given many responsibilities because Biden didn't trust her, and she had so many disfavorables. So, I mean, Kimberly points out Vance was a drug addict. For the grace of God, there go half the United States. But he got over it. He rose above it. I don't know his background exactly. But here's the point. You keep bashing Vance. Well, you can look at these policy positions. I don't know what they are. I like to know them. I know that Kamala's policies positions are an anathema to the American people and people who are hardworking and need to make a living. I mean, it's Biden renewed, right? So I see that there's a huge issue here in those comparisons. Do I trust Vance more than Kamala? Well, I don't know enough about him yet. I certainly don't trust Kamala because of her record, because she's the most liberal senator ever to be in the Senate. It was shown statistically. So, people don't like that. If they understand that, I agree. If it's based on policy, Trump wins. If it's based on a personality war, which is what they're trying to make it, then it's going to be closer. But Trump just has to be smart about it.
So
Trump has to be quiet. Trump doesn't say too much.
One at a time, Rick, and then.
All right. The California bar, I just looked it up, has a 34% pass rate. So most people, it would have been great if she passed the first time. I guess she passed. Most people don't pass it.
Yeah, but Hastings has a 64% pass rate. She didn't pass because she wasn't prepared. And because she wasn't prepared, it shows her character.
I know my dad took 5 tries to pass the CPA exam. So
the CPA exam is the second toughest exam statistically. The toughest exam is the actuarial exam. That's by far the toughest. Then the CPA, the bar exam is a lot easier than both of those.
The CFA level 3 is a bit harder to make a CPA, but anyway, let's move on.
Go ahead, you're up.
All right, so I just wanted to come back to the VP. All this attention that's being put on the VP, and I'm like, when does this ever happen? When has there been this much attention? Everyone talks about how little Kamala Harris achieved. Anybody want to tell me what Dick Cheney achieved, or I've forgotten who was under Obama, who Obama's VP was. I've forgotten, but we don't pay that much attention to VPs normally, right?
Biden was
Biden. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. I was being silly. Do we know who? Do we know what George H.W. Bush achieved while he was Reagan's VP? Do we know what Al Gore did when he was Bill Clinton's VP? I mean, what are we talking about? She doesn't have that much influence right now.
There's a big difference. George H.W. Bush was a congressman. George H.W. Bush was CEO of a major oil company. George H.W. Bush was the CIA director. George H.W. Bush was ambassador, to China. I mean, I could keep on going on,
but you can, but you missed my point. What did he do while he was the VP? That's what I'm referring to. As a VP, they don't do that much while they're there, right?
You do as much or as little as the president gives you. And the question is, do you do it well?
And like I said,
so the Obama-Biden thing was exceptional in that Biden had 9 times as much experience holding national level elected office as Biden. Biden, 36 years in the Senate, headed the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. Obama had 4 years as a senator. So, yeah, Obama's going to lean on Biden in that situation.
And I think that's what.
But again, that was my point, right? Obama was a very popular person. That's why I was trying to make the joke, right? Who was his VP? Because at the time, nobody ever spoke about Biden. Nobody really paid that much attention to Biden. It's only after he took the nomination and then ran for president that all of a sudden people start talking about him, and they didn't question his. From what I remember back then, nobody really questioned that much how much he achieved as a VP because, again, Obama was a much more active person, right?
The bottom line is the only thing that really matters. The only thing that really matters. Well, hold on. The only thing that really matters, other than maybe the state the VP's from, all right, is the president. That's what people vote on. Mark, you've had your hand up.
No, I had a quick question. One, I was going to make a joke, just like
You're breaking up.
Al Gore invented the internet during that time, if I remember correctly, and that little joke that he created the internet during that particular time that he was vice president and all along those lines. But that wasn't my question, but I did hear that kind of notion and everything. I was just wondering, David, from your standpoint, because I know here in North Carolina, we're now getting more people that are going back out into the public and going out to events and everything. So from an economical standpoint, because I've got some friends in this industry and everything, how important do you feel the sports and tourism industry is in terms of getting votes and support? Because I know we're going to end ADF, which is the American Dance Festival, and it brings a lot of revenue to the city of Durham, and there are a number of other things that bring revenue in, including the Durham Bulls here in Durham. I just wanted your take on sports and tourism, because I know even up in DC, a lot of the museums get criticized, but they also bring a lot of money as people go visit the various Smithsonians and everything. But I just wanted your take on the impact of sports and tourism to the economy.
Well, obviously, different states have different degrees of reliance on sports and tourism from a variety of perspectives, including revenues. I mean, take, for example, Florida. One of the reasons that Florida doesn't have state income taxes because they get a lot of revenues from sales taxes and occupancy taxes and other things that are driven by, tourism. Obviously, major events, no matter where they are, festivals, concerts, things of that nature, also present an opportunity to piggyback on political activities. I know, for example, one of the events that Trump had in Wildwood, New Jersey. I think there was some other festival that was going on, and he ended up having like 70,000 people show up. I'm sure a lot of those were for him, but I'm sure, a number of them were also because of the festival that was going on at that point in time. So, here in Washington, tourism is important, okay, but the fact that we're the capital of the country and the free world is more important than tourism. Plus, while you do end up generating revenue off of the money that people spend when they end up going to a lot of our museums and sites here, for the most part, they're free, to get in.
But I think that's probably the least of your problems, though. You talked before about potentially decreasing the difference between the top rate income tax and capital gains. But how's that going to apply to foreign investors? I'm not American. I come in and buy property in the United States or anything else, make a profit. The capital gain doesn't originate in the United States. It originates in the country that I'm tax resident, as long as I'm coming from a treaty country. So what's the proposal there? Do you either A, put taxes on foreigners, which you do that, you're going to decrease your attractiveness, or do you B, let foreigners continue getting that preferential tax treatment? And if you do that, well, then foreigners are going to be much better off and going to be able to make a lot more money in the United States than people that lived there. Because you are the leader of the world, you're more inviting of international capital than anywhere else. That's a difficult thing to get right.
We have the largest capital markets. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
what do you do there?
You make sure that whatever tax system you have is competitive internationally. That's important. It's particularly important with regard to global corporations, but it's also important to the extent that you're talking about capital flows in general. So that's something that you got to focus on and make sure that you're at least competitive in that regard. I will tell you that what the people supported during the tour that I did is they supported territorial taxation rather than global taxation with regard to.
I'm absolutely stunned, actually, that America still has that. I mean, on so many things, the world has gone so far away from these types of things, and having residence-based taxation just makes absolutely no sense. And Americans often talk about wanting to be attractive to immigrants. Who are you planning on attracting if what you're going to do is have successful people from other countries move to your country to set up businesses, get a green card, but they may still spend a lot of time in their own original home country? And now they have to pay tax on their entire worldwide income assets.
That's the way it is now. That's the way it is now.
That's what I'm saying. That's why I don't understand where that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know. That's what I'm saying. It doesn't make
Okay,
any
we're in
sense.
agreement then. I thought you were disagreeing. Okay.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely in agreement. You know what? If you guys did that, if you guys changed your tax code, that would probably get me over the line to want to move to the United States. The reason I don't set any of my branch offices up in the US and I would prefer to go to Canada is for that very reason. Because in Canada, I can trade to the US on fair terms, but I don't have to pay worldwide tax there.
And guess who my next call is with, but it doesn't deal with this subject. The Commissioner of the Internal Revenue Service. So I must get off right at noon because I have a noon call with the Commissioner.
What
real
are you
quick,
talking about? What are you
David,
talking about
when
with
is
him?
your just a minute, David? When is your debate that you're co-commentator on?
Yeah, the final debate hasn't been set. It's for the second tier of candidates, the Libertarian Party, the Constitution Party, the Green Party. They're going to try to get RFK Jr. To be part of it. The tentative date is the evening of September 18th, and the tentative location is Los Angeles. But I'll keep people.
Can you say what you're talking with the IRS guy about?
No.
Okay.
Let's just say this. It doesn't relate to me. I'm in good shape.
I hope it doesn't relate to me. I've already been down that road. God knows that was a handful there for a couple of years, finally proving that they lied. But yeah, I mean, I personally think we'd be better off if we dismantled them and go to a simple tax platform and process the money without middle hands touching it. But
some countries tell you how much they do your return for you, and because the IRS has all your records, they could do that. They say, this is how much we think you owe. If you disagree, then let us know. Otherwise, just pay the bill. That would save hundreds of millions, maybe a billion hours in people having to mess around with tax returns.
Right.
I
think that we're getting close to the top of the hour, and David's going to have to leave soon. Does anyone have any more questions for David?
I just had a quick question, David. How important do you think it is going to be some of these, for lack of a better term, groups that are out there that are trying to be appealed to, whether it's by Kamala or whether it's by Trump or a number of those two primary candidates? Because, I mean, one of the things that we're hearing a lot of people talk about is the J.D. Vance comment about cats. So a number of cat owners are coming out in support of Kamala. And I do know that Trump appealed to a lot of the NASCAR people as well. So I just wanted your take on
Mark, it was about childless women more than it was about cats. But go ahead.
It was childless women who happened to own cats. Right. That's right.
So
that wasn't actually.
It was just a degrading remark.
Hang on, that's not what he said. Guys, go back and watch what he actually said, please, because he didn't just come out and say that.
It's being mischaracterized.
It has been, and it's been mischaracterized quite badly.
It's going to come down. It's going to come down to about 7 states, and it's going to come down to independents. That's what it's going to come down to. Let me mention a couple of things, though, because we said we were going to talk about a couple of things that we haven't. Fraud, waste, abuse, and mismanagement. The latest estimate of fraud, waste, abuse, and mismanagement in the federal government is $233 billion to $521 billion. That's really low. And let me tell you why it's low. Because we don't have key national indicators. We don't know what's working and what is working. And if we focused on trying to determine what are we trying to accomplish, how do we measure success, what type of value for money are we getting, we would find out there's a huge amount of waste that's not even being captured by that. And I think I already mentioned about EV chargers, that $7.5 billion was allocated to build EV chargers. I don't recall the U.S. government paying to build gas stations around the country. And so the first question you have to ask is, why is the federal government spending this money for a subset of the population? And of the $7.5 billion and the $500,000 target for public charging stations, so far they built 8. Yes,
I'll build them for you. I'll build them for you for only $500 million a station instead of $1 billion a station.
All right. Quick question for you. You're in an elevator with Kamala Harris. You have 30 seconds to convince her to make the deficit part of her platform. What do you say to her?
If you love your country and you love your your children, she does have children, but she's a stepmom. Then you'll do something about this, because if we don't put our finances in order, our economic security, national security, international standing, and domestic tranquility will be seriously adversely affected over time.
I'd like to just say that as far as the internal financial situation of the United States, that is a concern. It does have an effect on your international relationships. But I think the other thing that gets left out of this conversation a lot is, allied countries, Europe doesn't buy very much from you. They don't buy your cars, they don't buy your clothes, they don't buy your food. I really think that there's simple things that America can change that would actually make American products shine in the international markets, and that would also help to drive jobs, help to drive up the GDP. I think US politicians sit back and ride on the fact that the economy is so big, as opposed to actually trying to make it bigger and better and raising more tax revenue as a result.
There are 500 million Europeans. So yeah, that's a market that's 50% bigger than the U.S. domestic market.
There's 700 million.
GDP is about the same. GDP is about the same.
And it should be, if Europe got its act together, Europe should have double the GDP of the US, and it doesn't for much of the same reasons, because of financial mismanagement. But the US is in the prime position in the land of opportunity. If government would just set up programs to encourage that opportunity. Look, we want to buy your cars, but you won't make them to our standards. Like, just change a couple of things in the factory. Like, it's not hard.
Yeah, it's like when I went to Japan the government sent me to Japan in the middle part of my career, and you look at how small the homes are and everything else, and you look at American products. The reason you don't sell anything over there is because they can't fit. I mean, the cars are too big, the appliances are too big, etc. You've got to be able to adapt to the cultures that you're dealing with.
But Dave, you guys don't even sell your cars to us here in Australia, and we love your cars, but you won't sell them to us. Finally, Cadillac, my favorite brand over there, finally they have just said they're going to release their cars here. But like you've got countries that actually want to buy your stuff, and just little things like GM refused, for example, to change the indicator lights at the back of the car from red to amber. Like, how much would that cost to change in a factory? Like, I don't get it. So that's what I'm saying. There's so many little things that can be changed that would make more products shine in other countries, like wealthy Western countries, and you guys just won't sell them to us.
Well, and I also want to state something. Other countries didn't steal our chip manufacturing. We basically handed it to them with our outsourcing and big corporations. We didn't influence the big corporations to keep those jobs here. So, but we do have a big problem with the way we are spending money. I do know that the contract for the EV stations, I think, evolved around the fact that Ford brought back their manufacturing from China to America, built a manufacturing facility to employ people. And it was for electronic vehicles, and the government signed a contract with them to do that. So I think that that's what that evolved from, but I'm very disappointed that they did not spend the money appropriately. And I think mismanagement and misuse is very prominent in our government. We need to stop it. And I think David has opened up a door that we need to look into and find out, why didn't they build more than 8? Where did that money go, and who spent it? Whose hands touched it? And that's what we need to start doing, is accountability, which David preaches on all the time. We need to do that. And unfortunately, we're at the end of the hour. David, keep the IRS straight for us. Thank you very much for your time. And
thanks,
discussions.
everybody.
Everyone, have a great day. We'll talk to you soon.
Have a great week. Take care.
Yeah, and don't forget to be perseverance. Just because you fail doesn't mean you can't succeed.